a while, but this year we are celebrating that Tom has been with us for 10 years and leading the charge. So I'm going to go ahead and let Elio take over from here, and we're going to get started. And thank you all for coming.
All right, thank you so much, Ashley. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Now let's shake it off. I know it's early. We're here to have a good time. We're celebrating 10 years. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, I like to hear it like that. Thank you so much for coming. This is a wonderful audience. I see a lot of familiar faces. My name is Elio Harmon. I'm the founder of 614 Startups. 614 Startups is Columbus's #1 source of startup news and interviews. It is an honor to moderate this very special edition of Founder's Story. We got a stacked panel here. The topic of our conversation today is Rev1 10-year review and what's next for the startup community. Please join me in a warm welcome of my panelists, Tom Walker, CEO and President, Kristy Campbell, Chief Operating Officer, and Mike McCann, Chief of Innovation Partnerships at Rev1 Ventures. Let's give them a hand. All right. Now, we'll be in conversation up here for about 40 minutes, and then we'll turn it over to you, the most important folks in the room, to ask your questions. You'll have at least 15 minutes of Q&A, so jot those questions down, keep them in mind, we'll come to you. We'll have mic runners at the end, is that right, Ashley? All right. She'll be looking for those hands up, and Giselle in the back as well. And they'll give you a mic so you can ask your question. This is being recorded, by the way, so, you know, whatever that means to you, okay? All right. Now, Tom, Kristy, Mike, we have to go through 10 years and predict the future in 40 minutes. Are you guys ready? All right, let's do it. Tom, I want to start with you. So, the story begins about 10 years ago when you come to Columbus from Oklahoma. And two states, right, Ohio, Oklahoma, that would be described by folks on the coast as flyover country. But what drew you to Central Ohio? And how did you recognize that this region and state would become a hotbed for early startup activity?
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Coming through? Yeah. Well, first, thank you for being here. We appreciate you taking time this morning, and it was great, the networking this morning. I think we're all getting our networking chops back, but it's nice to see several friends in person that I've only seen on Zoom here for the last couple of years. Mark, how are you? Good seeing you. Yeah, absolutely. So good seeing friendly faces. What first drew me here? Well, I wasn't looking to leave my home state, and Columbus came calling, and I did a couple of trips here, and what really stuck out to me was just a lot of opportunity. With as many Fortune 1000s that we have here, and pretty solid economy, we tend to, take the economic bumps pretty well in Columbus. I thought that this could be a place where we could band together the right kind of resources to impact the startup community. And after a couple of visits, I think the one thing that really stood out to me is everybody I met in Columbus was very aspirational. They all felt like the best days were ahead of us, and I think we all still feel that way. We think about recent announcements like Intel and what kind of tech impact that's going to have. But we forget like the Honda announcement last week. Had not announced Intel, Honda would have been like the biggest announcement, economic development announcement in years, right? So just think about, we're all just believe that our best days are ahead of us, and I think at the end of the day, that's what attracted me.
Yeah, now could you predict that 10 years ago? Because it feels like there's been quite a bit of acceleration over the last few years, right? So was it, hey, I'm going to a place where there's tons of potential and I can see it, or were you a little bit foggy when you were making the decision?
Foggy every day, Well, there are resources in Columbus to do what we do, so we're focused on helping startups build high growth companies here, and there hadn't been really an effort at scale to do that. And so, I felt like after the conversations that I had, we could actually make something happen. And because there is a commitment to continue to grow this community, not just the big companies that I mentioned, but the small companies that can end up making a huge impact. And I think, looking back now, there aren't, it's not one example or two examples, but we have scores of examples of that kind.
All right, there you have it, quote of the day.
Wake up!
All right, can you guys, okay. All right, if that happens again, I'll probably turn my mic off and just project a little bit. Is that fair? All right, so there you have it, quote of the day. Tom Walker says it's okay to be foggy in your business, okay? You don't have to have it all figured out. All right, so did you always envision through the fog the Rev1 that we see today? And what were some of your initial priorities? And how do they differ from your priorities today?
Well, partnerships and funding was number one. I think it was mine. So I'll try to project. It's not my strength. Partnerships and to help fund the strategy, was really number one, because we really had to form a cohesive group of partners that wanted to help build the startup community. And so that was really number one. And we called that connecting the assets in our backyard, so we began really looking at what are the resources that we could pull together for the benefit of the startup community. So you think about our research institutions, Ohio State University, Nationwide Children's, and then our corporate partners in this region, logos that everybody knows, Nationwide Insurance, Cardinal Health, AEP, just kind of go down that huge list. And then the service provider community, many of which are in the room here today, the accountants, the law firms, all those kinds of groups that could help entrepreneurs. And so we spent a good 10 months really pulling that initial group together that helped us then partner with the state through the Ohio Third Frontier, which was actually at a very pivotal time in its life. So they had just hit 10 to 12 years, and the state was beginning to think about how they really want to fund this effort. So it was really a community effort to pull together a vision and a strategy that then both the community and the state funded.
Okay, and if anybody knows Rev1, you guys are all about partnerships, and I'm glad that Mike is up here too. We're going to talk about those partnerships early on. But what are the priorities for you now? I know partnerships are always going to be top of mind, but what are you really thinking about today while you lead this organization?
Well, we think about serving the community, so I talk a lot about servant leadership, and so for me, I'm in this role because I like serving others. If you think about that from the corporate perspective, Rev1's a nonprofit. Nobody owns Rev1. The community owns it. We're here for the community, and so we are here to serve the community. And so how do we measure impact? We measure impact when the entrepreneurs and those that we're serving are growing, either as professionals or as companies. And so we continue to think about the resources that we can pull together to get back out into the community to help these companies. And so we're continuing to grow things like a mentor network, but a very diverse mentor network that can help all of our portfolio companies. And we're not just growing that network here, we're growing it nationally, so we can bring that kind of talent here to grow the companies. And we're continuing to think about different types of capital that we can band together to help companies at the earliest stages. Pre-seed and seed is really where we like to focus.
Yeah, and I can attest to that as a founder. I mean, when I started 614 Startups in 2017, the Rev1 today has evolved quite a bit. And I think all of the evolution that I've seen has been in forwarding your mission of being a service-based organization and supporting founders. So I've experienced it. So perfect segue to Kristy. Kristy is a 614 Startups podcast alum, so we've had an extended conversation before. But you've been here almost since the beginning, right? At least over the last 10 years. And early on, you spent most of your career within software
8, it feels like 10 some days.
Okay, 8 but 10. And you spent most of your early career in software startups. Why did you identify with the vision of Rev1? Why did you want to join this team?
Yeah, well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. You know, really the vision of Rev1 and Tom sort of selling me on that vision sort of hit me at 2 levels. You know, first, very personally, I felt like I had just spent years and years and years in, you know, software startups among the handful of people joining the founder to build the business, and I was seeing the gaps that he was talking about, right? Not just in raising capital, right? Most of the companies that I had worked for had raised capital. I mean, outside of maybe some angel funding, the capital they had raised came from the West Coast or the East Coast or Europe. And so that really resonated with me. Seeing the challenge in hiring really resonated with me. You know, working for a startup is very different from working for a corporation. And we had made mistakes bringing sometimes folks who had been running 100-person teams to try to start a part of the business. And so you really, in a startup, you need what you need at the time you need it. And so it has to be very point focused, and then you have to hire people that can scale. And then finally, I was seeing just the gaps around sort of navigating the product market challenge. And in some of the companies I worked for, I would say, we went and raised capital before we had product market fit. And that's very painful. It's painful for the founder, it's painful for the team, because you now have people who are bought into a strategy that will not be successful. And so those really resonated with me on a very personal level. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, there's an organization that can help founders sort of see around corners, think about these gaps before they run into them. And so I knew that in my experience in 20 years here, I had not seen that. At least I wasn't aware of anyone doing that. And so that really resonated with me. And then more broadly, just Tom's vision and the early team's vision for the impact that we could have on the community. And so I was thinking, oh, I could, you know, not just be working in one individual startup, I could get the chance to work with dozens of founders and really have a bigger impact beyond me. So there were, you know, it really hit me at 2 levels. And there were times when I was like, I remember you saying during my one of my first conversations with you, you know, Columbus is going to be one of the most active seed regions for seed venture capital in the U.S. And I was like, what? Really? How are we going to do that? But to be able to think about and sort of watch him set that vision, it was really no different than the founders I had worked with. They had the vision, and I came in and partnered with them to help execute on it. So that it's really not that much different, and I was really excited about both levels of that.
Yeah, you raised something very important in the startup world, particularly in Central Ohio. How many people out here are building teams? You're hiring people, actively hiring people today. All right, we got a couple hands up. What I hear back in terms of the hiring, employment, job market, it's really tough, right? And being ops here, there are 2 things that I've seen: an evolution in your programming and services, which I'd love for you to give me an overview, or us an overview of, and then how you went about building your team. Because I know you were very mindful about how you went out and attracted people and who you have on your team now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll start with the team. I mean, obviously, you know, Tom and those that came before me hired an amazing team. I think they had to reboot the new organization. They had to find people that had very specific experiences to build out the beginnings of the services and the capital stack. And so that started long before me. I mean, by the time I came in, a lot of the foundational programs were in place. You know, Tom, Mike, others had already started building them. I was really at a point where we were kind of launching Rev1 and starting to think about how do we iterate on programs. So I think that's really, excuse me, getting over something that's been 2 weeks at this point, really looking at what's working and what are the iterations that could be made on those programs was really important. And so, for example, if you think about the mentor program that Tom talked about, we've had a mentor program for years. It's had really engaged folks in it. And most of those folks come from years and years of experience working in startups. That has not been an incredibly diverse network, mainly because those are the people that were starting companies. We've iterated on that program specifically now, as Tom mentioned, being able to identify, you know, women and entrepreneurs of color who have either started and built businesses, who have raised capital, who have advised companies, and really heavily curated, you know, the beginnings of what will be a pretty powerful network to be able to work with entrepreneurs and work with them in a much more culturally competent way. So You know, that's really where I spend my time, is thinking about how have the needs of our clients changed, and how do we iterate on the programs.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to come to you, Mike, aka Mr. Partnerships there. You've been with the organization almost a decade as well, and you've been a part of many parts of this business. So please tell us a little bit about your journey and some of the rewards along the way. What has been the most rewarding part for you?
Yeah, I'm happy to. First of all, just want to say that I'm absolutely thrilled to be here on this panel and to talk about some of these experiences at Rev1. So thank you all for joining this morning. And I'm excited because I've had a big accomplishment this morning for some of my team members who are here in the front row. I sat quietly for about 15 minutes, which you know is hard and bottled up. Now it's gonna come out here. So brace yourselves. But so for me, I'll try to make this quick. Part of my journey goes back to when I was in college. I was an undergrad at Ohio State, and I was good at two things. One of those was going to most of my classes. A second was GameCube Mario Kart, and it took me a while to figure out what I thought I wanted to do. And that, as I was going into my senior year, I thought I was going to go to law school. As a history undergrad, I was signed up for the LSAT, and I just needed a summer job to make some money while I studied. And that summer job just happened to be a company that was small, but was about to take on venture funding. And I had never heard of venture capital, didn't know what it was or what it could do. So I joined a company that was a dozen people. By the end of the summer, they raised $5 million. It was 80 people. I got to do things I never thought I'd be able to do. I didn't know how to open an Excel spreadsheet. And now I'm doing the analytical work with these different teams. I'm doing customer relationship work. I'm doing some marketing. I fell in love with it. I never took the LSAT. I stayed with that company, joined full-time after I graduated, and got to see the ups and downs of what it was like working for a startup. So I did that at another company. And so as that second company was acquired, the opportunity to join Rev1 and to, as Kristy said, work with dozens and hundreds of entrepreneurs on the other side of the table. How can you support them was an opportunity I didn't want to pass on. So if I'm honest, I really enjoyed that startup experience. I thought I was going to work for Rev1 for 2 years, probably end up in an operating role in one of those cool companies we get to see, and I was going to join it. But something that crystallizes as well is back in 2014, 2015, we put a New Yorker cartoon in the front of our Rev1 overview decks. I'm starting a startup that helps other startups start up. So to me, the desire to go join one of these companies never really rose to the top because I feel like I've been able to have that startup experience at Rev1. We talked about the programs we create, the services we create, the partnerships we create, the funds. I feel like every year we're coming in and saying, what can we start doing to help this community and help entrepreneurs? And so that is a process that I feel like we're starting on day one every day when we walk through the door. It's really exciting.
Yeah, so the value proposition for corporate partnerships and working with Rev1, I know one of them is making meaningful connections to startup and startup technologies. Can you explain the work that you do, how you engage corporate partners, and then the value proposition to them?
Yeah, definitely. How do I do it? Well, it's not easy, Tom. It's a lot of work. So I'll pick up on something Tom said earlier where if you go back to 2012, 2013, engaging corporations was always part of our strategy. At the time, we maybe had 6 or 7. Now you go and look at that wall, there's 45. So it was always a strategy to figure out how can we engage partners, how can we engage corporations to be a part of this mission and the work that we're doing. Where it's grown or evolved to, and there was an inflection point in 2017, and I try to describe things in simple terms. So Alicia is in the back of the room, she heads up our programs. I'm going to try to keep this really simple because I know there's a lot of work that goes into them, but that's the startup studio that we talked about. It's good at 3 things. How do you source and bring in opportunities? How do you vet them? How do you perform due diligence? And then how do you engage them, provide services, provide capital? So that thing that we do in the community, sourcing, vetting, engaging, is a powerful engine. And around 2017, we started to get companies tapping on our shoulder saying, hey, we're seeing a lot of disruption in our industries. We're seeing a lot of startups in our space. They're chipping away at our market share. They're bringing new technologies that maybe we have trouble building or can't build. We want to do some of the things you're doing with that startup studio, and we want to focus it on our business and our market. So we started working with State Auto, started working with Smuckers, with Grange, on and on to sign a new partnership with Worthington Industries. And essentially what we're doing is how do we take this startup studio, wrap it around that innovation strategy, and help our partners be a part of this innovation infrastructure in the community, engage with startups, partner with them, invest in them.
All right, so Mike gave a shout out to Alicia in the back there. Her episode of the 614 Startups podcast is dropping today. So if you want to get to know Alicia, her episode drops later on today. She's doing a lot of work supporting founders as well. And we have an extended conversation about her work. All right, before we go through another round of questions here, I want to get a sense of our audience. So how many representatives will you describe yourself as being from a large corporate, a partner of Rev1? Okay. How many founders in the room? All right. How many investors in the room? All right. Couple. Investors always hesitate because they know they're going to get bum rushed by everybody. Right? So put your hands nice and high. You got money. All right. And then how many employees of startups or of Rev1? Okay. Great. So that's our room, guys. All right. So Tom, I want to come back to you. Let's talk about the Rev1 way, right? Because culture does matter. Having participated in Customer Learning Lab, I'm familiar with your emphasis, the organization's emphasis on market validation and customer alignment. What areas do you feel are most important for entrepreneurs who are just getting started?
Well, we think about customer first. Our goal is to build sustainable companies here. And the kinds of capital we have at the pre-seed and seed stage, we don't have a lot of moonshot capital here, so our focus is how can we help entrepreneurs build products that the market cares about? Because if you can do that, that product market combination can build a business. And so that's really the first thing, first conversation that we have with entrepreneurs. Have you validated the product? If not, we have resources to help you go through that. That's really the number one thing. By doing that, that helps open the doors to investment capital and helps you as an entrepreneur go to business faster.
Yeah, that's usually one of the first things out of my mouth when somebody says they want to build a business is go through Customer Learning Lab, right? Go through Customer Learning Lab. I have that experience. Market validation is absolutely important. Kristy, you alluded to that, trying to build a business without it. But I wanted to come to you and some of the work that I know you're very excited about. And we know that the data shows that diverse teams perform better, right? That's not even an argument at this point. Looking at the numbers, Rev1, which now has more than 60% women and 20% people of color on its staff, and better than 50% diversity representation within your portfolio companies, you've clearly positioned yourself for continued success. How have you been able to achieve this? Because some of the feedback I get is it's really hard to do. And more importantly, what are Rev1's priorities for diversity, equity, and inclusion going forward?
Yeah, well, just to start out, I think this is not a Kristy narrative, right? It's this is something that's incredibly important to everyone on our team. In fact, it's an important part of our hiring process that we're looking for people who really are bought in on the fact that we will be more successful, our clients will be more successful if our team is diverse in backgrounds and in thought. And so I think that's one of the fundamental things that we decided as an executive team early on was that this cannot be one person's role that's out in the community and advocating for the importance of solving for some of these big challenges. We knew that to do this well, we had to have it be something that was built into the studio program that Mike decided. So that was a really important shift and something I got really excited about because obviously we are sort of the executive sponsors of that. We care about it. We report to our board, they care about it. But we have to be always advocating for it and making sure it's built into the studio. I think when you look at just the shift in the team, I mean, we've always said as we've been building out the team that if we want to represent the community that we serve, which continues to change over time, our team has to look like the community we serve. And so, we made a very intentional effort to, with every new role that came open, we wanted to make sure that that pipeline was diverse from, the first conversations we were having, phone screens, all the way to the final candidates that we were hiring. I think that's how we've been able to really diversify that team. And of course, I'll call out our head of talent, Dni Grand. Put up your hand, Dni. She not only has hired the majority of our team in the last 5 years, but also does that work for our clients. So
she also joined us during the pandemic.
She joined us.
She was our first staff member to onboard
virtual.
Yes.
So. Yeah. So I think it starts with that. It starts with the team really being bought into, as you said, that we know that our company and the companies that we serve will be more successful if we have a diverse team. From there, I would say it gets a little more challenging because, Elio, you know the stats, you share the stats, right? Very little venture capital makes it to women and even less to people of color. We know that as a 30-person nonprofit, we can't tackle that alone, right? That's an industry challenge that has happened over time. So where we choose to spend our time is really twofold. One is we advocate for those gaps that we see, right? With our partners, with, whether it be the state or the partners in the community, we try to elevate the challenges, but then we really focus on what can we do based on the gaps we're seeing with our clients. And for those, we really focus in a couple of key areas. The first is, I talked about that whole, entrepreneurship and creating a pathway to entrepreneurship. I talk about that a lot. We know that we need to be out in the community working with our other entrepreneur support organizations, including yours, to be able to identify and reach entrepreneurs that may not have ever felt comfortable reaching out to us. So we've got some really strong partnerships in that area. One of them that I know there's folks from Eventi here is an organization called Eventi, Tyrone, that really helped us to understand how entrepreneurs felt about Rev1 and why or why not they might not have been coming to us. And then more importantly, probably putting in place programs to help meet them where they are and help to sort of cultivate a business that could be looking at how can technology enable my business to grow. So pipeline building is a really important piece. The second piece that we've chosen to put time and energy and our own funding into is really that early gap of, okay, I'm starting my business, but I don't have access to familial wealth. I don't have access to friends and family funding. Where am I going to get started? Because the other traditional venture funds are a little later. So we recently launched I wish we would have come up with a better name for it, but it's the Dni Grand Fund, and it's simply funding for founders to help them, get the business started. So it's that early funding, and then I mentioned the mentor program. I mean, that program is, I think we all believe on this panel that is the future of advisory for our clients, right? It's pairing entrepreneurs with people who have been there and done that and helping them to reach milestones and do the hands-on work to build the business, but also meeting them where they are because they might have similar backgrounds. So, we kind of try to look at it from those two lenses of what can we do actively and what can we advocate for.
Yeah, and Rev1 is taking meetings. So if you know some folks in your life that need to be engaged with this organization, refer them, right? Reach out to Rev1. You're looking for a job, you have a company, you have an idea. Rev1 wants to engage with the community, so referrals are always welcome. All right, Mike. So to Kristy's point, this is a 30-person nonprofit. You can't solve all the problems of the world. Kristy, sorry, heavy is the head that wears the crown, okay? That's the expectation. I know it is. And sometimes you guys probably feel the pressure of that, right? Like Rev1 should fix all the problems. But Mike, you have insight into what our large corporates feel about the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so in your engagements with them, what are they telling you about their priorities when it comes to that? And how do you think they'd like to see Rev1 kind of help them achieve some of their objectives?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it's easy to fall into a trap or a simple way of viewing it to say, okay, we're just here to solve corporate problems. That's all we care about. We don't, that can be HR's job to solve those areas for diversity and inclusion across our business. But where we see it work well and where we really push our partners, and I'll use Coda as an example, it's twofold. One is we want to bring some of the same things Kristy mentioned. How do we look at our startup pipeline from top of funnel all the way through to the companies we're piloting with and lining up for partnerships? And is that pipeline diverse? Is it well represented? Are we finding founding teams that are inclusive and are represented across their team? So we're tracking that at every level of pipeline. The second thing is we're looking at the types of problems we're trying to solve, the solutions that, not just the solutions and the teams that we want to bring in, but what are we solving? Is solving this problem going to make our service, our product to the community more inclusive? Is it going to help us reach more people, reach parts of the community that we can't otherwise get to? And we want to bring that methodology and that thought process, that mindset to all of our partners and how they're approaching it. So they're structuring their innovation practices with that in mind from the start, not ignoring it or thinking it's someone else's role in the corporation.
Great. Ashley, Giselle, keep me honest. How we doing? Okay, thumbs up. All right, so let's get to the numbers, Tom, right? I'm sure there's some numbers people in the room. I want to take a look at results for the moment. So we're 10 years in review as of our celebration here today. Where has Rev1 achieved the most impactful results? And recognizing that your work is ongoing, what does the future look like?
That's a great question. That's almost a trick question. What's the greatest results? We think about economic impact. Our partners care about that. We've reached $4.5 billion in economic impact in the region in 10 years. So the way we measure that is the capital attracted to our companies that we support as well as their revenue. So I remember when we set the goal of $2 billion economic impact, and we did it in the room around the corner there on a whiteboard, and we thought, is that possible? By end of next year, we'll probably be at $6 billion economic impact. So one of the things that's interesting about the model now is the growth, the cumulative growth starts to get a little bit faster. So we're proud of that. But I think there's so many companies to point to that we've supported, and we're all very passionate about that. That's why we get up every day, is we're just passionate to sit in front of an entrepreneur who has wild ideas, and we learn from them and they learn from us. But you can't do that without a team. And so, I'm privileged to stand up here and represent the team and be with Kristy and Mike. But when you think about our executive team, the average tenure is 8 years old. We've been here 8 years. So Ryan Devon is in the back. He manages our investment. He's hiding right now behind somebody. But he's been here 10 years. Dave Dillman has been here 8 or 9 years. I don't think Dave's here this morning, but he's our CFO. Wayne Embry has been with me for 10 years. Our leadership team, which is the managing directors, the average tenure is a little over 5 years. We mentioned Alicia earlier. Alicia's been with us 10 years. She's part of that team. And so we've added a lot of new team members, 16 this year. How many during the pandemic overall? At least half of the team is new in the last 3 years. And and I see some of the beautiful faces here. Those are going to be the leaders of the future. So I think I'm most proud of the connectivity and the continuous support from that team that are really committed to this community. Because if you don't have that kind of tenure, it's a lot.
Earlier this year, you guys got out the crystal ball and you did some predictions about the future. So, we're going to do some predicting about the future, but let's reflect a little bit before we do that, right? So I know startups that go through this startup studio and portfolio companies as well are all like your kids, right? You love them equally. But you mentioned $4 billion of impact. Let's talk about some of those companies over the last 10 years that you say, represent a big portion of that, right? Those companies that went out, grew, maybe experienced an exit. What are some of those companies that come to mind for you?
Let's see. I think of a company called MentorClick. Is anybody from MentorClick here today? I don't think so. You don't see them much in the community because they're busy growing a business. And this is a company that started in the cubicle right behind this room. Two brothers who felt like they could make an impact in corporate mentoring with the new generation of workers that's coming up. And so, what was that, 2013, 2014, we partnered with a couple of angels in town, provided the first $100,000 for that company, and they're growing like gangbusters. It's been a nice exit for the Rev1 funds, which allows us to just roll those dollars into future funds to support future companies. But they are now impacting corporate mentorship. And think about what's happened during the pandemic, a lot of virtual workforce. How do you mentor this new generation of professionals in an environment where we're not all in the same room? And they're also making a huge impact on DE&I staffing, related topics. So we're real proud of the MentorClick. Well over 100 employees at this point. Oh my gosh, where do we, UpDocs. UpDocs became one of the most used telemedicine doc platforms in the world during the pandemic. the office in Dublin, where they started right here. So many examples. And now, when you look at the industries that we're serving, take the life science industry, which is primarily spin outs from Nationwide Children's and the Ohio State University. In 2012, when I moved here, there's hardly any life science industry at all. Today, we're about to form our third life science fund in partnership with those two research institutions, and there's a steady flow of opportunities, which make up about 30 to 40% of our deal flow every year. So think about how that industry will look in 10 years and how that will reshape part of our community. There's a lot of examples. I'm sure the team would like to. We would want to throw out another.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, please.
Well, I want to talk about one that I think is going to be that next one, hopefully, in a handful of years, and it's a company called Sure Impact. Sherry Cheney Jones is the founder of that. I know, Elio, you've had the opportunity to interview her probably multiple times at this point. A company that we've been privileged to work with since the formation of the idea. So Sherry comes from her career working in and serving government and nonprofit industry and helping them to really understand and take advantage of the impact of their work. And what she was seeing on a daily basis with her clients was that they were really struggling with quantifying that impact and being able to put more money in the right places. And so I think she would say sometimes, I felt like this was a problem that was just calling me to solve for it. It wasn't her trying to come up with an idea and throw it at the wall and see if she could fund it. Like, it was a real problem that she was solving. And so she connected to Rev1 through one of our team members, came through Customer Learning Lab, and I think she realized really quickly, I think it was on day 2 when we spent time sort of surveying potential customers for, if I build this, will you pay for it? And I think she was like smacked beside the head, and yes, they'll buy this if I build it. And so I think then she had to make the tough decision of, do I go and build this? I still have this other successful business. It's doing well for my family. And she made the decision to go out and build it, and obviously came back to us for first funding to do that. And those first customers came on board. They've all renewed with the product. First product in the market in 19. She's probably got 40 customers at this point that serve hundreds and hundreds of other organizations. Closing new customers on a weekly basis. She just closed a big customer this week in the Columbus region that I can't wait for her to be able to talk about. But being able to be alongside her and watch her just flourish in building a business that she probably never thought she would build. But
We love the new ones.
we just get excited. I
Talk about Lindsay and Strong.
talk about Lindsay and Strong Suit. So, would you want to talk about Lindsay and Strong Suit?
I can talk about Lindsay. So Lindsay Michaelitis, she's the founder and CEO of Strong Suit. So a great background. She came up in the management consulting world, and as she started her family, she was tasked with this project at her big, well-known brand name consulting firm. How do we solve for this challenge of when we have women leaders get to certain points in their life, we have a retention issue. What is it? We don't know why it happens. We need you to help us solve it. So she did the research. She went in, just like a management consultant would, went out, did a landscape, did the research, did a ton of interviews, and came back and found out that it wasn't that these individuals weren't able to perform in their roles. It's that the life demands start to get commingled with your work demands, and it becomes untenable. It becomes really, really hard to continue that. So she took that idea and created Strong Suit. How can you create a product and a platform and a service that can help be that concierge for you as a busy working parent, specifically targeting mothers, but has found a lot of traction with working fathers, with grandparents, with people who are dealing with these beyond the 4 walls of the office kind of life matters. And how can you be part of it? How can you help people make them successful at home with their personal life so that you can be successful, you can be present, you can be whole in your professional community as well. So she's had great success. You will usually start with 1 or 2 people inside of one of these corporations, but then somebody tells somebody, who tells somebody else, who tells somebody else, and all of a sudden she's got a big enterprise client there because they're seeing the impact of what happens with employee engagement, the productivity, the results that they can bring to the company when using their product. So a great example of someone who is asking the right questions. What problem can I solve? What impact can it have? And going from there, and you keep pulling on that thread, all of a sudden you've built a product, you've built a team, you go out and raise capital, and it's one of the companies we're really proud to support here.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, we could go on and on, this could go on all day.
Yeah, and that's good, right? That's part of 10 years in review. It's all of the companies that you're helping be successful. And this is not to toot my own horn, okay? But all of the names they mentioned have been on the podcast. And so if you want an in-depth understanding of what StrongSuit is, or SurePath, and you not only want to learn about their company, but who they are as people, because at the earliest stages of a company, you're really investing in the team. You can truly get to know who these people are by listening to the podcast, okay? So that's a plug for the podcast. You should follow on social media and all of that and listen, okay? That should be part of your weekly routine. All right, we are going to get the crystal ball out, okay? And we're going to talk about the future. What do you see as the future of the Columbus startup ecosystem? I'll start with you, Tom.
Well, if we stay on the same kind of growth path, you're going to see the attraction of a lot more capital to town over the years, which will bring with it talent. And that's just sort of baseline, which is interesting. But if we think about the industries that are moving to town, and what's the projection that we'll have? Mark, maybe you can help me with the numbers. Intel, 500,000 to 1 million new people over the next decade or 15 years, something like that, moving to town. Those numbers are staggering, and those numbers represent a lot of talent that are moving to town. And so I think that it's going to create sort of a wildfire effect with the startup community, because the world is starting to see there's opportunities here, and the more talent that we can attract here, the more companies that we can grow here. One of the challenges we're going to have is access to capital, and so would certainly like to see the creation of several new scalable venture funds in the region. So I would like to look back 10 years from now, and this front row has 6 to 10 new venture fund general managers sitting right here, so they can tell a story. I think that's a gap we have right now. So access to more funds. The talent piece, I don't want to suggest that it's going to fix itself, but this is a magnet city now for opportunities, and so I think how we all harness that is really the task at hand.
Gosh, well, those same things. I think that from the talent perspective, I think it will be exciting to look back and see a bank of entrepreneurs who have gone on to start multiple companies and invest in multiple companies. So entrepreneurs becoming investors and that sort of fortuitous cycle. But also just a talent network where folks going from one startup to another startup potentially feel comfortable doing that. I think you see that more in other communities that may be further along in the West Coast. Obviously, it called out for that. It's not uncommon for someone to come out of Stanford, work at a startup. A year later, they get pulled into another startup, and they go around, and there's not a fear of, I'm going to work at the next company. I think when you're in an area where I think we're still, in some cases, robbing Peter to pay Paul from a talent perspective, but one of the startups will grow, and they'll sort of steal all the talent because they need it, and then you're left with a gap in some of the other companies that aren't as well funded yet. So I hope that we will then have, through that attraction that Tom talked about, more people will come here and they'll feel comfortable taking a chance on working at a startup and then get that experience to go on to do it again from that perspective.
And Mike, talk about the future. Let's say all the forecasts hold, right? And we just explode. Everything is to the moon. All industries are to the moon, right? Where do you see the future of corporate innovation going?
Yeah, that's a really good thing to ponder because some of that is going to be dictated by those individual companies and their performance. But what I look at is if we have that crystal ball 5 years, 10 years in the future, Columbus really being a destination city for innovators. Not just the innovators who are going to create new companies for all the reasons that Tom and Kristy mentioned, but innovators who want to work with large enterprises and large corporations. I mentioned an inflection point in 2017 for our partnerships where we said, how do we partner with corporations to do that startup studio work with them? I feel like we're in the midst of an inflection point now where we have growing innovation teams inside of a lot of corporations here. We're seeing bench strength getting created at that innovator level where, to Kristy's point, if somebody leaves one of those innovation teams to go join an innovation team in another company, it doesn't feel like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. We have roles and infrastructure created where you're putting somebody else into that seat and they're becoming an innovator. So if you fast forward and do that across more companies and more time, you could imagine a state where if you want to get involved with corporate innovation and corporate ventures, Columbus, Ohio is one of the first, if not the first cities that you're going to look up and say, how do I find an opportunity here? Because I know I'm going to get the training I need.
How are we doing? Okay, great. So 5 minutes, we got enough time to get into trouble. All right, so, the off-script questions, right? I'm gonna put this paper down now. We're gonna get real for a moment. So,
There was
a little bit of one. I predict everybody in this room is gonna do really well. I assume everybody is trying to get rightly positioned to be on the spaceship. But as you think about the role of your organization and making sure that the success of the city is enjoyed by everyone, what are your thoughts there about cities that we've seen that have experienced massive growth, but not everybody comes along? The creation of widening gaps by the success that's ultimately created by a growing startup ecosystem. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so how do we prevent the widening gap? So at the corporate level, I think there's two parts to it. Part of it is what I mentioned earlier, where when you're thinking about corporate innovation, you're not just thinking about, I have a bunch of nails, how can I find the most efficient hammer that's closest and the easiest to connect with and solve that problem? It's how do you do the hard work of creating a diverse pipeline, but also do it in a way where you're looking locally. I think one of the things that we're really proud of with our innovation partnerships is that we're not just, we do scan the globe for solutions, but something that's grown out of that is we've helped create infrastructure that allows our partners to look locally first a lot of times. We create a lot of connections with the entrepreneurs, hundreds of years, each year, with entrepreneurs here in the community that we can find ways to partner with them, help them grow their companies, and do that locally is really impactful. I think the second area is if you go beyond corporate innovation and you look at how corporations and enterprises can support it, it's asking the question, where do you need to put your philanthropy dollars? What kind of things can you invest in the community that can make an impact so that you can close that gap? And some of it can be with the work that we're doing. There's dozens of other organizations, a lot of which with whom we partner, where you can put those resources as these companies are growing and profiting to help address some of the challenges that we see in other regions.
Yeah, I mean, we think a lot about that gap, and it goes so far beyond Rev1, and I think we're privileged to be at the table with our partners at the city and the county and the foundation and the partnership to talk about, what's going on. And so while we may be serving a very sort of small sliver of small business, which is high growth, tech enabled in certain industries, we know that those companies come out of a thriving small business economy. And if that economy is sort of not getting what it needs to get started and not thriving, then our work is at risk. And so, both the city and the county with other partners have done multiple studies that highlight this. I think the community will, I foreshadow, the community will come up with some solutions to be able to fund a broader small business, basically like a Rev1 for small business, right? But a broader organization or a broader coming together of organizations to amplify the work that's being done. There are already organizations doing this work, as you know, but they're underfunded, they're understaffed. A lot of those people are contractors, and so how do you build that same support mechanism for the broader small business? And I think, you mentioned earlier the heavy is the head that wears the crown. I mean, that, we get a lot of that directed at us, because it's sort of like, oh, well, we're starving over here, but yet you keep launching funds, and it's like, well, we're focused on this sliver of the market, but, you know, as I mentioned earlier, if the broader small business economy is starving and doesn't have access to what they need, then our work will continue to be challenged. So we care a lot about that. You know, we're at the table when asked for talking about how we can advocate and support that. I think the community, I'm convinced, will come up with solutions that are bigger.
Those two make me so proud. We face some real challenges in our community. Not everybody is thriving at the same pace, and if we think about the number of new people that are going to move to this community over the next 2 decades, some of those gaps could just get larger if we're not careful. And so for our overall economy to thrive, each part of the economy needs to thrive. So we have advocated for the creation of a special organization to provide support with different parts of our community, which is so important. There's even with the large amounts of federal funding that are coming into communities right now, there's a lot of that funding can't go to places where we see there's a lot of need. So these support systems aren't designed properly in many ways. We think about how can we increase the number of science and tech grads in our community, people of color. That begins to start the path of creating wealth. And so that's just one example of things that we advocate, that we think about, that we know are big gaps, because all of the support mechanisms need to be thinking about programs that create wealth, and that's how we're going to thrive. So I do think that over the next decade, we need to see some concerted efforts to that provide different kinds of small business help and funding to other parts of our community.
All right, one more, maybe we'll take 30 seconds each. I know this is being recorded. People all around the world are going to watch this. They're thinking about where to locate HQ2. Give us your best pitch for why they should move their company to Central Ohio. Go.
We're one of the fastest growing tech cities in the Midwest, and if you want to have a great quality of life and create wealth for yourself and your family, there's really no better place than to move right here in Columbus. You'll have a wealth of opportunities. You can bounce from startup to startup, and we have examples of that happening.
Thanks, Tom.
I think you would want to come here because it's one of the most connected communities in the U.S. and maybe the world. I mean, what drew Tom here was that connectivity in the corporate base. It goes beyond the corporate base, right? It goes to the public sector. It goes into the individual communities. Everyone has a shared goal of what we want this community to be, and you can get a meeting with anyone, right? There's this sort of two degrees of connectivity, and this community operates in a different way. And you hear that from folks who have located their businesses here. They're like, I heard that was what happened, but it's really real. And it's just exciting, and I think it's not seen in other areas. Our peers in other communities wonder how we build those connections with the corporates. They wonder how we were able to raise capital at a very risky stage and continue to make each of those funds bigger than the last. So it's that connectivity and that shared vision.
We give two answers to that. One is just echoing what Kristy said. When you look at that wall, when you walk in this door and see 45 logos, that doesn't happen in other cities or shops. That just does not have the level of collaboration, the level of engagement is unique here in Columbus, and it's a special place because of that. The second reason, if you're starting a company, you need customers. So do yourself a favor, get a big map, put a pin in Columbus. Take a string, that would mean 250 miles, and just draw a circle. Look at how many research institutions you get connected into for the talent days. Look at how many Fortune 1000s you can drive to in a half day to get potential customers. look at what you can do by basing your company here in the center of gravity you have if you're going to get started and just all the advantages that Columbus can have for you.
I like it, Mike. Great pitch, man. It's like you've done this before, right? Okay.
Who's with me?
All right, folks. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Let's give a big round of applause for our panel. All right, now we're going to turn it over to you. Don't be shy. Raise your hand if you have a question. I got a question right here in the front.
Steve, up here. Hello. Hello.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry, I'll go back to you. I'll trying to be very brief. My name is Michael Hargrove. I am a social entrepreneur. I just learned that term being here in Columbus. I really didn't know what I was for a long time until I began to really get out in the community. Social entrepreneur company that I started is Dad's Enterprises, similar to Johnson & Johnson. They create programs, products, and services, right, for a particular market, baby powder. We do that for fathers. We create, whether it be in the areas of financial wealth, health. Unfortunately, guys, we do a little bit better with our health. So one of the things that we do for the entrepreneurs, call them dadpreneurs, is that providing that sure suit type of connectivity. One of the challenges the customers that we serve have is, I met 3 people with the same idea. We're all struggling. What resources do you have to build collaboration? So like with our dads, all of them probably have 2 hours a day to work on their business, similar businesses. We help them individually, but we're not sure how to connect all of them. So instead of you having 3 CEOs, why don't you guys be co-founders? We're just not sure how to build that synergy. When you talk about collaboration, like, can you actually teach how to collaborate, or do you have resources that can teach, whether it be an organization like myself or an individual? Say I was one of those dads.
Well, I think, I'm putting on sort of an entrepreneur that would engage with Rev1. I mean, absolutely, that happens organically. It also happens programmatically. So, starting with that initial program that Ela mentioned, Customer Learning Lab, entrepreneurs are coming in and they're hearing each other's ideas, and they're talking about sort of what are the key features that are going to help this thing take off. I mean, you mentioned that you've run into companies that are trying to solve the same thing. In some industries, we've seen hundreds of companies come through trying to solve the same thing. And I think from that perspective, it really does start with, what do your customers want? What are the sort of fundamental things that are going to make them want to buy this product? And that starts with that customer validation work that happens in Customer Learning Lab. There are other programs in the community that do that as well. And then I think having then access to another broader network of entrepreneurs. I mean, that's something that our entrepreneurs continue to tell us that we need to keep getting better at. I think pre-pandemic, there were things like this happening every day in this building. I mean, this building had 3 and 4 events going on every day. And so that importance of finding other entrepreneurs at my same stage, other entrepreneurs that are tackling the same challenges I'm tackling, is incredibly important. So we're always looking for ways to bring those companies together, to learn from each other, whether it be founders dinners, events like this, but helping to sort of create that network, I think is also a growth area for us.
Yeah. And real quick question, can I add to that, his question a little bit? What are the characteristics of a great founding team? Like, so if you are going to collaborate with someone, what have you seen that make for a great founding team? And then what are some good characteristics you want to look for in a co-founder?
Yeah, I'll try to answer both of those with this, because what I wanted to add to Kristy's comments is Customer Learning Lab can be a great environment for that. And it's not something where we can sit somebody down and say, you collaborate with you and make it work. That's not how this is going to happen. But what Customer Learning Lab does is it creates an environment where the characteristics of a great founding team can come out. So it's not just a program where you sit down, you check a few boxes, and you go. It's hard work. You spend 20 hours over 2 weeks with us, and you spend probably another 20 or 30 hours outside of the program working on your business. So you get to figure out, how do you work with each other? And I think the characteristics of a great founding team and what you would look for with these 3 individuals, do they not just have a similar idea, but do they care so passionately about solving this problem? They're willing to sit down and say, what does it take to do it? I'm willing to do it. And even if that means I'm going to be an operator and you're going to be CEO. I don't have to run this business. I just want to see the problem get solved because I care about it. I experience it. I know there's a market for it. And I think that carries through to what makes good founding teams, where people can identify and ideally self-identify and be comfortable with their roles on that team. Some of it might mean some deference, but fundamentally it's about a mission to solve an important problem and build a great company.
The only thing I'd add to that is great teams have high degree of integrity, they're coachable, and they have shared goals. And that's what you see out of co-founding teams. You need shared goals because it's hard work, and it is a marriage in many ways. It's 8 days a week, starting the company, and you need to be on the same page.
Yeah. All right. Hope that answers your question.
So basically have them come to Rev. No, but I mean, the programs that you have, you described, really, I think, gives me a direction to say, hey, I hear that too. Rev1 has a startup. I didn't know that. So that's.
By the way, I loved your pitch. You give an entrepreneur a microphone and you're going to do it. I love it.
All right. In the back.
Hello, my name is Noah. I just want to say, first of all, just congratulations on 10 years. And one of the things I've noticed lately is VC firms who had cast a wider net of deal flow into the Midwest, that they were transitioning these areas of focus back into Silicon Valley. And I just wanted to ask, why do you think this is, and what does it mean for Rev1?
That's a great question. Thanks for being here. Well, when times are good, you see capital move outside of the valley, and we've had a good 10, 15 years of that. That is where most of the venture capital in the U.S. It's on the coast and a couple other big cities. So in flyover regions, that's not a term I don't like it, but I think we're getting better at not being a flyover state. But I think Midwest cities are going to have a disproportionate disadvantage in tough market conditions. And so what happens is, if you run a fund in the valley, as an example, you have all the deal flow you need in your backyard. And this is hard enough work that if you don't have to get on an airplane and travel, why do it? It's quality of life. So I think when things get tough, you do see funds pull back a little bit. And so it's something we're cautious about in the economy we find ourselves in right now. What's interesting is if we look at the last few deals that we've helped start here this year, the majority of them have had oversubscribed rounds, which means there's more investment capital coming to the table than the entrepreneur had planned on raising. I wouldn't have predicted that. I thought things would slow down a little faster. So, we'll just have to wait and see. But it is, we are co-investors, so we always work with other investors, and so it's something our team spends a lot of time on, is helping entrepreneurs find other investors. So we're keeping a close eye on that, and hopefully we get through this period just fine. It was a great question.
Well, can I add to that?
Sure.
So you mentioned earlier. Well, I'm trying to get into trouble. So you mentioned earlier lack of moonshot capital. That's usually characteristic of the investments that are being made on the coast. They're looking for moonshots, right? They have to have outsized returns to return their funds. So talk about crystal ball. Do you see a future in Columbus where we can attract that moonshot capital with maybe a scenario like this? I dream big, I go big, I raise capital, I fail massively, and then I'm able to raise again. Do you think there's an inflection point in the future of this ecosystem where that is possible? Right now, it feels, I don't know if we're that mature as an ecosystem where somebody could raise, fail massively, and turn around and raise again, which is what we see on the coast quite frequently.
Well, one of the incredible assets we have in the town is Drive Capital. So, Drive is 12 years old now, maybe 10, somewhere in there. So they have $2 billion under management. If you look at the types of investments they make, those are moonshots. And so it's another reason why Columbus looks different from our peer cities. Our peer cities don't have a fund like that. So, I mean, they're the largest VC in the Midwest. I mean, who would have thought that, right? So, and they just closed on another $1 billion. So, let's, you know, with excited eyes, look at what they invest in over the next, 5 years or so. So that's a tremendous asset. And, when we talk to people like Mark Baume or Chris Olson, will the fact that they're here attract other fund managers like them, or it's not unusual for fund managers to leave a fund to start their own fund. So could that happen with Drive? Those kinds of things are in my chair, you hope for and you hope to see. So, that's Indy doesn't have that. Pittsburgh doesn't have that. Cincy doesn't have that. Cleveland doesn't have it. So that's a real benefit for us, and I think something that has us as a community, and a startup community, sitting in a good place.
Okay, thanks, Noah. Anybody else? All right, I got a hand right here, and then we'll come to this gentleman right here in blue.
Thank you. I'm Kathy Peters. I'm co-founder of iCare Network, which is a healthcare technology platform. And I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Rev1. We have been part of the Startup Studio, and I cannot tell you how much we appreciate the support that you've given us as co-founders. My co-founder, Rich, is not here today. But everything that you mentioned, from the mentor program to help with the diversity and the programs that you're really building for inclusivity, have had a huge impact on how we're growing our company, and it wouldn't have been possible without you. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you. So everything you've been doing and shaping the last 10 years, we thank you from the bottom of our heart.
Thank you.
Hey, Kathy, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you, Ilya. I'll pitch you later.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, Joe Bailey. I'm from S&T Bank, commercial banker, also a small business owner. I build PCs on the side, still love the technology space. You guys have a lot of small businesses, startups that come to you. What are the characteristics of the ones that succeed, and where do some of them go wrong? I think we want to know kind of what are some of the success stories you've seen and how they get to the stage that you want them to be.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I think Mike touched on this earlier. I think key characteristics for success are that super focus on what the customer challenge is, the problem, solving the customer's problem. Like I always say, you need to fall in love with the problem your customer has. If you're starting the business primarily because I need to figure out how to create an income, I need to figure out how to create wealth for my family, I need to figure out what my next is because I'm bored at this other job, that can maybe be a secondary or tertiary thing, but it can't be the main reason that you're starting the business. I think it would be hard to be successful if you weren't starting with the customer. I think beyond that, it just kind of waterfalls. It's do you understand how to build a team? Do you understand what you're inherently good at and what you're not inherently good at, and how that changes as you build the business? So being sort of open, and we call it intellectual honesty, like being honest with yourself about what you're good at, right? We talk about those things every day on our team, what we did right, what we did wrong, what we're good at, what we're not good at. And so I think entrepreneurs have to do the same thing. And sometimes that comes across as sort of coachable, right? Do they see the gaps? Are they open to suggestions of maybe you need to get someone to think more about the day-to-day operations if you're the vision person, right? So it's that understanding of intellectual honesty. I think another area that stands out to me as you are building a business, and that's mainly because of sort of the pain of watching it in the startups I was in, is watching sort of for those false indicators of growth, right? So just because you can get a contract with a client or potential client doesn't mean that means you now have the ability to go get 100 of those contracts, right? I think it's sort of having what we sometimes internally call happy ears, right? It's like, oh great, I got a contract. And it's really understanding what that contract represents. Does it represent a big enough market for you to build a business around? And just really rolling up your sleeves and understanding what does that business model look like. If that contract is representative of 1,000 more like it, what do I know about how that business model has to work for me to make money off of it? And I think, those are things that happen discussions that have to happen from day one.
Yeah, so, I was watching a talk by Sam Altman over at Y Combinator, and he puts the luck quotient at anywhere from 1 to 100 as a multiplier of potential for success. Let's talk about the luck quotient, right? Like right time, right product, right industry. For example, I'm thinking of a company now who would happen to be building mobile refrigeration, and then the pandemic hits. And they sell like 1 million mobile refrigeration units and exit, right? So a little bit of that factor. What have you seen over the last 10 years? Don't call any names, but you get what I'm saying, right? The luck quotient, right place, right time, and the multiplier effect of that.
Yeah, we all saw a lot of that in the pandemic, right? You get a great example, but companies, well, take Updocs. You asked me not to mention the name, so I just mentioned the name, but that was a great company going into the pandemic and growing revenue, et cetera, but all of a sudden, the world needed an online teledoc platform, and they were one of the handful in the country that were in the market already, and so they became one of the most used platforms. So luck does have a lot to do with it. I think the number one stat for why businesses fail is lack of product market fit. So you see a lot of companies raise capital to try and create that market channel, and that's a tough path, and you need a lot of capital. So product market fit, and every business needs a little luck, without a doubt.
Doesn't hurt to be lucky, folks. All right. Any other questions? Oh, okay. We got time for one more. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, one more. I know you got one. Oh, I got a different hand. I got to go here.
Hello, how you doing? Getting to the end of this. So what's either the biggest surprise you've seen over like, I wouldn't have thought that, or the most amazing pivot you've ever seen one of these startups do? So you can answer either one of the two questions. Oh, come on, it wasn't that bad, was it?
I got one, and I'll try to, I won't mention names but I think it's a positive story, but I'll try not to avoid it. But there was a company that came through, and they had an idea around how to get temporary child care for your kids if you needed it. And to be honest, the first couple of conversations, one, it was hard to fully understand what it was for. Two, just didn't really like the idea. And part of that is, I'll admit, just bringing my own bias to it. I didn't have kids at the time. I didn't know what it was like. I didn't know the challenge of trying to find students. So just, okay, I kind of get your idea, but I don't see how it can work. The company went to customer market. They talked to their customers. Tom mentioned the number one reason companies fail is because they don't actually solve a market need. So they went out and they got the data. And every time they went out and surveyed people, they came back with responses that were overwhelmingly positive. Not just, oh, that's a good idea, I'd use it if I had it. It's like, I need this thing right now. If you had it today, I would sign up, pay for it, I would use it. And went over and over and over again, got more and more data. And they actually got the company off the ground. They were able to get launched in Columbus. They were able to go to multiple markets. Now, it didn't end up becoming a high-growth venture-backed company, but it surprised me because I didn't initially think it was a company that could even get off the ground, much less raise capital, and they got it off the ground. They got a profitable business growing because they did the work and because they talked to their market and validated it. So that one, to me, is one that I always look at as if they keep going out and asking the questions and keep getting these answers back, you can't ignore it. you can't say it's not a good idea because they're finding it. And that's one that to me just always stands out as an example of the model working.
Okay. All right. One more round of applause for our panel. All right. Thank you, folks. You're welcome. Ashley, you gonna take it away? Give us our final announcements. What are we mixing, mingling, passing out business cards, getting to know one another?
You can do all of those things.